Okay, we have a couple people that are still trickling in, but I'm going to get this meeting started because it is 6 o'clock and we have the auditorium from 6 to 8 p.m., so we'd like to move the meeting along as expeditiously as possible. My name is Colleen Connolly. I'm the Community Relations Coordinator for DEP in the Northeast Regional Office, which includes Susquehanna County. We're holding this public briefing to talk about the compressor station explosion at the Lathrop Compressor Station on March 29th. There's been a significant amount of interest in this, and we want to answer your questions as effectively and as efficiently as possible. It's our goal tonight to explain what happened, and as I said, answer your questions that you might have. First, to start off this meeting, after I lay down the ground rules, we're going to have a presentation from DEP, and then the operator of the compressor station, Williams Energy Partners. They will give their presentation also, and then it'll be followed by a question and answer session. Okay, so we were given the opportunity to write your questions down on an index card. If you choose not to do that, you can come up to the microphone and ask your questions. Okay, I'm going to lay down a couple ground rules. We usually have them at in events like this. So I'm going to lay down some ground rules also. It's going to be short, so we ask that you keep your questions until after the presentations. The presentations are going to be short. And ask your questions after we've had a chance to present what we'd like to tell you. We encourage you to submit your questions in writing, but if you choose to come up to the podium and ask your questions, that's okay also. We'll do our best to try and answer them. We will call those who registered to come up to one of the microphones to ask your questions so all people can hear in the auditorium. So rather than sitting in your seat, we're going to ask you to come up here and just ask us whatever it is that you have to ask us. And then if there is time remaining afterwards, and anyone who didn't sign up, I do have a sign-up sheet up there if I can ask our staff to bring it down when they're done. We'll go back around. We're going to ask that you initially ask one question. We have this from 6 to 8 p.m., so we want to get everybody an opportunity and a chance to ask their questions as quick as possible so we have a chance to answer them. If time permits, as I said, we'll come around again. This is a chance to ask a question. We're not here to take testimony, so please refrain from offering testimony. It's strictly a question and answer session, period. And out of respect to everyone here tonight, if you could put your cell phones on vibrate or turn them off, that way people can be heard. And please, as I asked you in the last meeting, if you were in attendance, please try not to talk or to speak softly when someone else is speaking, and please don't cut them off so we have a chance to move this meeting along. Okay, the next thing I want to do is I want to introduce the people at the front of the table. As I said, my name is Colleen Conley. I'm from DEP. Right here we have Mike Bedrin. He is the Regional Director for the Northeast Regional Office. This is Mark Wakesher. He's head of our Air Quality Program. Right here is Mike Dickinson from Williams. He's the Operations Manager. And this is Frank Billings. He's with Williams also. Mike Bedrin will be giving our presentation, and Williams will be giving their presentation also. So in order to move this meeting along, I'm going to turn it over to our Regional Director. He's going to offer the DEP presentation, and then we're going to hear from Williams. So I ask that you listen up, please. Thank you. Mike?
Thanks, Colleen. Can everybody hear me? Oh, there you go. How's that? Can you hear me? Good. You in the back? You hear me okay? Great, thank you. Well, I'm going to do a couple of things. First, I'm going to tell you, give you some background in terms of how DEP regulates the Lathrop Compressor Station. Under the authority of the Clean Air Act and the Pennsylvania Air Pollution Control Act, what we regulate are air contamination sources and air pollution control devices. So with within the Lathrop Compressor Station, the main air contamination sources are the 7 gas compressor engines and the 6 dehydrators. There's air pollution control devices that are referred to as oxidation catalysts on those compressor engines. The DEP issued a construction permit. We call it a plan approval, but it's really a construction permit for those specific components, and we issued that last February 2011. The permit sets forth certain conditions and for operation and monitoring of the engines and the dehydrators and the air pollution control equipment. A couple of the highlights of that plan approval are that it authorizes the operation of those engines on a temporary basis until Williams applies for an operating permit. They have applied for the operating permit, and that's pending for under review in our office right now. The plan approval also incorporates conditions for emissions limits for pollutants referred to as NOx, carbon monoxide, VOCs, volatile organic compounds, formaldehyde, and visible emissions. There's emissions testing requirements in the plan approval to show compliance, that the engines are operating in compliance with the emissions limits. In the case of Lathrop, emissions testing was performed in September 2011, and the results at that time showed that the sources were operating in compliance with their permitted limits. Testing was again performed in December of 2011 for CO and NOx, and the same thing, the results showed that the emissions were within their compliance limits. Before this incident, DEP last inspected the Lathrop Compressor Station in November of 2011. Apologize. Can you hear me? It seemed like it cut out. It did? Yeah. And it was... well, I can project my voice, so maybe you could hear me. I have to hold it. I'll just hold it down here. Anyway, the last inspection that we performed was in November of 2011, and the facility was in compliance at that time. So, let's wind the clock to Thursday, March 29th. What I'm going to do initially is talk about the initial notification to DEP and our initial response, and then we're actually going to turn it over to Williams, and they're going to walk through the details of what happened, what they did, and then I'll come back later on and talk a little bit more. So on Thursday, March 29th, DEP received notice about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We received our air quality engineer that's assigned to the Lathrop station, received a voicemail from Williams indicating that there was a fire at the facility. At that time, it was under control, and that they would provide a follow-up report. That voice message was retrieved at about 1:15, 1:20 p.m. At around the same time, Williams made another notification about 1:45 p.m. into DEP's emergency response line. So a couple of instances. DEP, in and around the same time, also got a call from PEMA, the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, that was also notified DEP that there was an explosion and fire at the Lathrop station. So what DEP did is we dispatched the engineer that happens to be assigned, the air quality engineer, is also a member of our emergency response team. So he traveled up to the scene, arrived at about 4 o'clock. At that time, if you recall the events, and we'll hear in a little bit more detail, the fire was just about out. It might have, I think it was described to me as smoldering at that time. But he made certain observations and he did certain things while on scene that day. First, he noted that the site was restricted. It was still an emergency scene. The emergency management people and the fire company were controlling the site, and it was still screened off. He confirmed with Williams personnel that the emergency shutdown system for the facility was activated, and gas flow into and out of this compressor station was turned off. He observed that Williams personnel were doing perimeter air monitoring around the facility with handheld portable monitors. And he observed those readings as Williams was going around. They were monitoring for methane and explosive level of gases, what we refer to as LEL, the lower explosive limits. The readings at that time weren't showing any, they weren't getting any readings. At that time, we didn't have any information as to what the cause of the explosion and fire would have been. His visual observation from some distance away that it appeared that the building suffered some extensive damage. The roof and the sides were off, so his observation at that time was the damage appeared to be extensive. He offered additional assistance to the emergency management agency, including You know, if they saw a need for additional air monitoring, our staff have pretty much the same kind of handheld air monitor that the Williams staff were using. At that time, the EMA indicated that there was no need for additional monitoring. So he left the site at around 6:15 p.m. on Thursday. At that point, all the compressor engines were down, and the flow of natural gas into and out of the facility was shut off. In other words, the compressor station was offline. So that is how DEP performed, or what we did in response to the initial response. On Friday, March 30th, late in the afternoon, my colleague here, Mark Weeksner, the air quality manager, received a call from Williams. At that time, Williams had seen the newspaper reports where DEP was quoted that Williams would not be allowed to resume operations at the Lathrop station until DEP gives its approval. At that time, DEP confirmed that that's what we had said, and that was what we advised Williams, was not to operate the engines until we received a more detailed report of what happened at the incident, and that we had an opportunity to come out and inspect the facility. In that call, Williams had indicated at that time, as early as late Friday afternoon, that damage at the facility was less extensive than the outward appearances of the building, or than originally may have been thought, that it was investigating the incident and making repairs, and that it would like to operate the engines over the weekend. We reiterated our notice that we would like the opportunity to inspect before that operation occurred. Williams asked if we could come out and plan to be there Monday morning. We agreed to have a team available to be on site Monday morning. So at that point, I think it's appropriate that I'm going to stop there. I'm going to come back then and talk about what DEP's actions were on Monday and beyond. But right now, we're going to turn it over to Williams, and they're going to walk through some of the details in terms of what happened and the activity and the actions that they performed over that weekend. So, I thought you were going to boo me. Thank you for clapping.
You almost put me to sleep.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Good evening. My name is Frank Billings. I'm the Vice President of Williams Gathering Processing Business for the East Region, which includes Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York. I guess first I'd like to start by thanking the first responders and the local township supervisors for the assistance and the support that we received immediately following the incident and then the days after the event. Williams and the local teams conducted an emergency exercise with Susquehanna County first responders earlier this year, not in anticipation, but in preparedness in the event we experienced something like happened at Lathrop. And I think this exercise, along with our relationships with the county EMA and the public safety officials, helped to ensure that the outcomes are what everyone wants. And I think we had some seamless teamwork there and good collaboration that took place between Williams and the responding public safety agencies during the management of this incident. So I appreciate that, and thanks again for that team. So what happened on March 29th? Well, during a maintenance, we were performing maintenance on one of the compressor units inside the building, and natural gas was inadvertently released into the compressor building through that compressor that was under maintenance. As employees evacuated the building, one of the employees pulled the emergency shutdown device, which caused the station to go through an emergency shutdown. Within seconds, the station shut down, but unfortunately, the gas inside the building reached an ignition source and ignited. So we had a fire, a natural gas fed fire that lasted until it extinguished itself as the station depressurized and the gas was shut off. What we did have after that was we did have a little residual fire, which was basically the lube oil or the engine oil that caught on fire as a result of the natural gas fire. So what was the root cause of the incident? Well, it was really a failure to follow one of our basic administration safety procedures that we require when we work on compressors. And that was we had an employee remove a lock that was on a valve that was locked shut. As part of our procedures, we'll lock valves shut as we perform the maintenance, and then those valves aren't to be removed until the maintenance is complete. In this instance, we had an employee come in and remove a lock, which then allowed a valve to get open, and when that valve opened, it allowed gas to get to a compressor that wasn't complete. The maintenance was not complete. The lockout tagout practice is one that's very important to our industry, and it's also important to other industries as well. You know, we've implemented corrective actions. We've worked with our local management to make certain that we've continued the training that we need. It's really a function of following the procedures that we have set out and in place. They're there for a reason, to ensure the safety of our employees as well as the communities in which we operate. So for us, it's really just making certain we reiterate those practices and we make certain that the folks that we have working on the equipment follow those procedures as well. There were no injuries that were reported or identified the day of the event. However, we had one minor injury that was subsequently reported by an employee. It's important for people to know that the emergency shutdown systems worked as they are supposed to work and they are designed. The system has multiple manual switches as well as gas detectors and fire detectors that help to monitor gas levels within the station, any one of which could have triggered the ESD. Williams' initial understanding was that actually one of the gas monitors set off or started the emergency shutdown, but upon further review of the data and the timing of the information, it was actually an employee that pulled one of the emergency shutdown devices that actually triggered the shutdown of the facility. On Friday morning, in an effort to get the compressor station equipment evaluated, that's really where it started in earnest. The first order was to make sure the building was safe. We had a safety contractor come in, structural and engineer, to look at the building, and there was no structural damage. There was a lot of cosmetic damage. As Mike said, the sheet metal was pulled from some of the sides of the building. Some of the roof was off the building, but again, there was no structural damage. And what we really did there was we had a contractor come in and begin to start removing that sheet metal so that we could begin to have a safe operating environment for us to start our restart activities. You know, the work then turned over to evaluating the condition of the emergency sensors and the emergency devices that are in the building. All of those checked out, all the fire eyes and all of the gas detection equipment. You know, a lot of that, really none of that was damaged at all in the explosion. So we were able to have a safe operating environment for us to begin our restoration work and for us to begin to get in and evaluate the equipment and again work to get it back online. You know, once it was determined that the environment was stable, we really turned our attention to getting the station back into operating condition. You know, within the guidelines and the rules that are contained in our operating permits and the operating rules and regulations of the facility. You know, by late Friday, we were able to resume gas flow around the compressor station using our dehydration equipment. We did work over the weekend to get the other units evaluated and started and to operate on a sustained basis, and we were able to accomplish that late on Sunday night. Now, several of the conversations with the DEP the week after the incident, and again, you know, hearing Mike's comments tonight, it's clear that the DEP believes that representatives of the agency should have been on site and reviewed Williams' efforts prior to restarting the engines. You know, if there was a failure on our part, I would say that we did not seek more clarity and maintain communications with DEP over that weekend as we worked on those engines. As we were working on those engines, we probably could have continued to be in conversations with the DEP. We worked within the framework of our permits and our own internal safety guidelines, which include all the federal standards. our own system integrity plan, which is our operating plan that governs how we operate our assets. And I think we addressed all the substantive issues discussed by the DEP prior to the weekend. You know, we reached out to the DEP first thing Monday morning. I called Mike Crancher personally to give him an update on the station, as well as other people within Williams. Reached out to the DEP. I think looking back at lessons learned, I think it's fair to say that, you know, we probably now have a clearer path to follow with the DEP as we work on some startup protocols and things that we might need to do better and more coordinated in the event we have an incident like this again. Now, I look forward to hearing your questions and answering any more questions that you might have around the incident. And Mike Dickinson and I will, to the best of our ability, address your concerns and issues. I'll turn it back over to Colleen to moderate.
At least you're fair about your dishing out your applause.
You almost put me to sleep too.
So Monday morning, as Frank said, a couple of things of note happened. As Frank said, we did have a conference call. Officials from Williams, both here locally and from their corporate offices, our environmental manager, called to report. I was on that call, as well as Mark and the staff in our regional office. We received a report, an update from Williams officials, kind of tracking what Frank just described, all the work that they did over the weekend. The testing that they had done, the evaluation of the pipings, the valves, the emission controls, the safety systems. They identified the root cause as having been human error and failure to follow the lockout-tagout procedures. They described how the emergency shutdown system worked as it was supposed to do. They described the building integrity analysis, that the facility piping and lines were checked for corrosion, breaks, cracks, and leaks. And they described how they gradually reintroduced natural gas into the system, first through the dehydrator units without compression, and then gradually through each of the compressor engines and piping to test simultaneously, testing for leaks in the system as they did that. And they described that, you know, late Sunday, early Monday morning, that compression was started on 3 engines at about 80% capacity. The other important thing that happened on Tuesday, as I had mentioned earlier, DEP had previously planned to send a team to Lathrop, the compressor station, and we did. We sent 2 air quality engineers and a supervisor to the facility. At the facility, they received a similar briefing that I just described from the plant personnel. They received a briefing in terms of all the work that had been done, given the status of the facility at that time. They conducted a walkthrough of the facility. They observed firsthand. They made firsthand observations of the facility. They remarked to me that you know, they were surprised at the inside of the building that the damage was not as significant. When you heard my earlier description that from initial outward appearances it looked like the building was blown apart. They did not see evidence of damage or fire in the building. Actually, their comment was, with the exception of where maybe the residual oil had burned on the unit that was damaged, it was hard to see any evidence of fire. So their visual observations sort of confirmed the report that we had received from Williams, that damage was far less extensive than one may have guessed by the outward condition of the building. The DEP team proceeded to do a complete and thorough investigation of the facility. They evaluated the engines that were operating, and most importantly, they looked at the air control devices, the temperature monitoring and the pressure drop monitoring that is required, as I mentioned, under the air plan approval to operate those air contamination sources. So at the end of that briefing, that walkthrough, that inspection, they concluded that the compressor engines, along with the associated air pollution control devices, the oxidation catalysts, and the monitoring equipment were operating in compliance with their permit conditions. And there was no concerns expressed by the staff at that point. And the concerns were, I think I would characterize it as that later that day when they got back to the office, I cross-examined them on their inspection and sort of put them to the test to make absolute certain that in their professional judgment that the system was operating as it should, and they didn't see any concerns for the continued operation at that point. On Tuesday, staff returned, one of our air quality engineers, excuse me, returned to the Lathrop station to observe stack testing that Williams performed on the compressor engines after they restarted. Again, that stack testing was using certified portable analyzers to test for carbon monoxide and NOx. Subsequently to that, the observation that day did not indicate any problems with emissions. We have since received the summary reports of the emissions testing on all those engines, and they were within or actually under the required limits. So that is later on that week. I think it was April 7th. We had previously asked Williams to provide us with a written incident report, investigation report. They did that. We received it, I think, late in the day on April 7th. We reviewed that report. We had a number of follow-up questions and additional requests for information of Williams. We sent that to them. We have not gotten a response, but we're scheduled to meet with Williams, I think, tomorrow. We're meeting to continue our discussion and review the additional questions we had. The nature of the questions were to provide some, to fill in some details that we thought would like to see in the report. So at that point, I think we're at the point we wanted to keep this short and give you a broad overview. And now we're going to open it up to questions. I have one question here that I will, and the one question that was written is, what time did the explosion at Lathrop actually occur? And I'm going to defer to Mike or Frank.
It was around 11:40 on the 29th.
Okay. Another quick question here. What are the horn sounds? And is there an area of notice of warnings? Were there alarms that sounded? Can you describe that, Mike?
Yeah, whenever we have an emergency shutdown at the facility, there is an audible alarm for the facility that notifies employees in the vicinity to evacuate the facility. Those audible alarms did go off and notified folks to leave the premises.
And I interpret this follow-up question, this second question is, what is the area of notice of warnings? Is that, what radius, I guess, would those alarms be heard on, if you know?
Yeah, those audible alarms are local to the facility. That indicates to our folks to initiate the emergency response, and if in the case of an actual incident, such as the one on March 29th, we then subsequently notify 911 and allow the emergency response for the area to become initiated.
What has Williams learned from this incident, and what corrective actions have been or will be implemented to ensure it does not reoccur?
I think what we've learned is that it's very important that we spend the time that we need to with our employees to make sure they understand the procedures that we expect I think that in our industry, what we find is that a lot of times the facilities and things like that are well-designed, and the majority of the incidents tend to be from third parties or from people not performing the activities as the way they should. And so from our perspective, the main thing we've done specific to this was really reiterate our lockout, tagout policies and procedures, but we also have taken a look at our work plans, our job plans, how we plan work, and make certain that all of those things are allowing the employee to take on the activity in the safest possible manner, and to be able to make certain that they have all the equipment they need, that they have the right tools, and also that they make sure that they have the right procedures and policies that they're in their hands so that they can perform the work effectively. But at the end of the day, given this incident, it really comes down to making certain that we understand and follow our administrative policies that we put in place around safety and operation of our assets.
If I could just follow up.
Okay, thank you.
Are there
Hang
any
on one second, sir. You're going to have a
specific
chance to answer ask your
I'm just
questions.
following up on the question on the table. Are there any specific procedures that have been changed or policy? Other than making sure people are trained, is there anything specific you've changed in procedure or policy in training and safety?
One of the things that we've done as a result of it is to go back and take a look at all of the procedures that were sort of associated with that. Some of those we've made some adjustments to help make the training or the point more clear, but none of the actual steps or procedures that were there have been changed. But we have made some adjustments to help with the training effort to ensure that what is expected is more clear.
Okay, we're going to move on now. I'm going to call off some names, people that want to come up to the podium, the microphone, and ask a question. I ask that you limit it to one question, and please refrain from offering testimony. Howard Hannum? Is Howard here? Okay. Craig Stevens?
Evening, thanks for being here, Williams, to answer the questions for us, and thank you, DEP, for holding this. It's a long question, but it's for both sides. So, how many compressor stations are operating in Susquehanna County? How many compressor stations are planned or permitted in Susquehanna County? And were you aware that no foam trucks to fight gas well fires exist in Susquehanna County, and that Lackawanna County had to bring theirs, and it took an hour and a half to arrive? And is Williams and the industry planning to purchase and make available these assets to local emergency responders so as not to put our first responders in danger?
Is your question how many compressor stations does Williams have in Susquehanna County? Or
Well, to DEP is how many?
Right.
I don't have an exact number, approximately 20 or so, is that correct, Ray? Yeah. 20
Operating?
operating. Well, 20 that have permits issued to them. I don't know if they're completely constructed and operating yet.
Okay, so that was my question, was why do we have any operating in Susquehanna County without the ability for our firefighters to respond and put out a fire that's gas well related? So that would be to your side then, Williams. Where are you planning on making these available or having an emergency response crew that won't put our own responders? Most of ours are volunteer firefighters. We don't want to put them in process of putting your fires out with our resources that we don't have. So just a question to you.
Sure. I guess the first thing is on a gas fire like we had, the best way to extinguish those is just to allow that fuel source to go away or extinguish itself. On a fire like that, we don't want to go in and put out the fire while you still have gas escaping, because you create another opportunity for an explosion. Once we know that once it is ignited, it's a safer environment than if it was extinguished. So we really let the fire extinguish itself with its own fuel. Then the foam truck was actually what we felt like was the best way to extinguish the lube oil fire. And, we had a meeting last night with the emergency responders of the Springville Fire Department, and we had a kind of a review of the event. And following that, Preston and I had a little discussion around what kind of equipment that they might need and require. And we're going to continue to discuss with them and understand what their needs might be, and see how we can, what kind of relationship we need to have, and how do we kind of work with them over the next, few months, and et cetera, to see kind of what kind of equipment makes sense, and work with them on that. But we aren't committed to doing anything specific at this point, but I just know Preston and I had a conversation on it, and it's something we'll continue to have discussions with them.
Okay, thank you. Vera Scroggins?
Just to follow